Mark was a young cowboy who lived alone on a quiet ranch far from town. His days were usually the same. He woke up before sunrise, fed his horses, checked the fences, and rode across the land to make sure everything was in order. He did not have many visitors, and he did not expect surprises in his simple life. But one afternoon, everything changed in a way he never forgot. The sky had turned dark earlier than usual that day. A storm had passed in the morning, leaving the ground wet and the trees dripping with rainwater. Mark was riding back toward his ranch when he heard a soft sound coming from behind a group of fallen logs. At first he thought it was an injured animal, maybe a calf or a young deer. But when he moved closer and stepped off his horse, he saw something completely unexpected. It was a little Apache girl, not more than 8 years old, crouching behind the log. Her dress was torn at the sleeve, and her feet were muddy from running. She looked scared, but her eyes were sharp and alert. Mark froze for a moment, surprised. Children didn't wander this far alone, especially not after a storm. He slowly raised his hands to show he meant no harm. She watched him carefully, unsure if she should stay or run. Her breathing was fast, but she did not cry. Mark spoke softly, trying to reassure her. "It's all right. I'm not going to hurt you." She didn't respond with words, only kept staring, as if she was trying to decide if he was safe. Mark set his hat gently on the ground and knelt so he wouldn't look tall or threatening. Then he reached into his saddlebag and pulled out a small piece of dry bread. He placed it on the log and stepped back. The girl hesitated, then slowly reached out and took it. She ate in small bites, watching him the whole time. That was when Mark understood she must have been lost. He asked her simple questions, pointing to the forest, the hills, and the trail. She answered only with small nods and gestures. It became clear she had been separated from her people during the storm and didn't know how to return. She was tired, cold, and hungry. Mark knew leaving her here would be dangerous. A child alone in the wilderness could not survive long. He gently held out his hand again, offering her the chance to come with him. This time, she didn't run or hide. She stood up slowly and placed her tiny hand in his. Her fingers were cold from the wind, and she shivered once the moment she stepped out from behind the log. Mark gave her his coat, wrapping it around her shoulders. She looked confused at first, then relaxed as the warmth spread across her body. He lifted her onto his horse and climbed up behind her. She leaned back slightly, trusting him just enough to stay close. The wind was soft now, and the worst of the storm had passed, but the land still looked gray. Mark rode carefully, not wanting to frighten her. When they reached the ranch, he carried her inside and placed her near the fire to warm up. He made her a bowl of warm stew. She sniffed it first, still cautious, then accepted it. Little by little, she began to relax. Mark tried asking her name, but she didn't answer. She only looked at him and touched her own chest gently, as if she wanted to speak but didn't know the English words yet. Mark didn't push her. He simply smiled and told her she was safe. That night, the girl stayed in the guest room with clean blankets and a soft pillow. She kept holding the edge of Mark's coat as if she was afraid everything around her might disappear. Mark stayed awake longer than usual, thinking about how worried her family must be. He planned to ride out early in the morning to look for them. The next day, she followed him everywhere. She walked behind him in the barn, watched him feed the horses, and tried to help him carry hay, even though she was too small to lift much. She didn't speak much, but she smiled shyly whenever he turned to look at her. Mark found it surprising how quickly she trusted him. Most children her age were usually shy around strangers, but she acted as if she had known him for years. By afternoon, Mark finally learned something important. She noticed some marks on the ground near the western trail and pointed at them with excitement. They were tracks, hoofprints, and footprints mixed together. Mark realized her family must have passed through looking for her. That meant she wasn't far from home after all. Before they left, he gave her a small leather bracelet he had made earlier that month. It was simple, but sturdy, with a small bead in the center. She looked at it with wide eyes, as if no one had ever gifted her something like that before. She touched it gently, then placed it around her wrist, holding it close. When they rode toward the trail, she sat quietly in front of him. Her back rested against his chest, and she kept looking down at her new bracelet. She seemed calmer now that she had hope of going home. They followed the tracks until they finally heard voices calling her name in the distance. Her people were searching the hills, worried and tired. When her uncle saw Mark holding her, he rushed toward them with relief. The girl let out a happy sound and reached her arms toward him. Before leaving, however, she turned around and ran back to Mark. She took his hand and held it tightly, as if she didn't want to say goodbye. Her uncle watched quietly, understanding that she had formed a bond with the cowboy who cared for her when she was alone. Mark didn't want to see her cry, so he bent down, smiled, and said something he thought would comfort her. "If you grow up and still remember me," he said gently, "I'll marry you one day." He said it with a light, friendly tone, like a simple promise meant to make her laugh. But she didn't laugh. She repeated his words softly in her own accent, trying her best to say them clearly. Then she nodded, as if she truly believed every word he spoke. She wiped her tears with her small hand and gave him one last smile before returning to her uncle. As they walked away, Mark stood still for a moment, feeling a strange warmth in his chest. He had no idea why such a small child had made such a strong impression on him. He thought the memory would fade with time, like many things did in a cowboy's life. He assumed she would grow older, forget the storm, forget the ranch, forget the shy smile she gave him. But he didn't know that some memories stay forever. He didn't know that the little girl would grow up carrying that bracelet, that promise, and that moment for the rest of her life. And he didn't know that one day she would return not as a lost child, but as a grown woman who came to claim the promise he made long ago. Mark's life returned to its usual rhythm after the little Apache girl left with her uncle, but something inside him had changed. Days passed, then seasons, and before long, years began to stack quietly on top of each other. The memory of the child he rescued stayed with him, sometimes soft like a fading dream, sometimes sharp like it had happened yesterday. He told himself it was only because the moment had been unusual. He had rescued people before, but never a child so young and so brave. He tried to move on, but her shy smile would return to him at unexpected times. His ranch grew slowly during those years. He built new fences, bought more cattle, and learned to manage the land better. But despite the progress, his life stayed lonely. He had neighbors, but they lived miles away. He had friends in town, but he didn't visit often. He preferred the quiet of the open land, the sound of wind moving through the dry grass, and the peace he found in watching the sunset settle over the hills. Sometimes in the evenings, Mark would sit on the porch with his hat tilted low and recall the night the little girl slept in his guest room. She had looked so small, wrapped in the blanket, so calm, yet so tired. He remembered how she followed him around the next day, how she touched her new leather bracelet again and again. Or had she lost it like children often do? He smiled at the memory, but the smile always faded quickly. He knew she was probably living her own life now, surrounded by her family and people. She must have grown tall, learned many things, maybe even forgotten about the cowboy who helped her that stormy day. Mark told himself this was the natural course of life. Children forget. People move on. Promises made jokingly vanish like smoke in the wind. But even then, he felt something strange, like a part of him was waiting for something he couldn't explain. He brushed it off as foolishness and kept himself busy with work. While Mark lived his quiet cowboy life, the little Apache girl Aina was growing into a young woman with her own stories. Her tribe still spoke of the storm that separated her from the group, The elders often told the younger children to stay close during travel, using her story as a warning. But for Aina, that day was not just a memory of fear. It was also a memory of kindness. She remembered how cold she had been behind the fallen log, how hungry she felt, and how the tall cowboy knelt down and offered her bread with gentle hands. She remembered the warm coat he wrapped around her shoulders, the fire in his ranch house, and how safe she felt for the first time since the storm began. Most of all, she remembered his promise, simple, warm, spoken to stop her tears. She repeated those words many times growing up. Not because she expected a future from it, but because they reminded her that someone had cared for her when she was vulnerable. Her people teased her sometimes when she wore the leather bracelet. They said it was too old, too small, or too different from their traditions. But she didn't care. The bracelet had become a symbol of hope for her. Whenever things got hard, when she struggled to learn new skills, when she argued with elders, or when she felt unsure of her place, she touched the bracelet and thought of the cowboy who didn't leave her alone in the storm. As she grew older, she learned English from travelers and traders. She learned to ride faster, aim better, and track animals with the skill of a person twice her age. She became respected among her people, not only for her abilities, but for her good heart and calm nature. Still, there was a quiet part of her that carried the memory of the cowboy. It wasn't a childish dream. It was a feeling of unfinished connection. One summer evening, as she reached adulthood, the tribe gathered for a ceremony. The elders blessed the young people who were entering the next stage of life. During the celebration, one of the elders asked Aina if she had plans for her future, if she wanted to marry someone from her tribe. Her answer surprised everyone. She shook her head gently and said she wanted to travel east for a short time. She said she wanted to meet someone she had known long ago. The tribe looked at her with curiosity, but no one mocked her. People in her tribe valued promises and memories, even if they were unusual. Her uncle, the same man who had rescued her years before, approached her afterward. He asked her if she was going to find the cowboy. She didn't deny it. She simply nodded. He sighed. Not in disappointment, but in acceptance. If your heart remembers something, it must have a reason, he told her. Just be sure the reason is good. Aina thanked him and decided she would leave before the end of summer. She made preparations quietly, gathering supplies, choosing her best horse, and learning more English to communicate better. She didn't expect anything from the cowboy. She only wanted to see him again, to show him she had kept the bracelet, and to understand whether the connection she remembered still existed. Meanwhile, Mark continued aging into a calmer version of himself. His shoulders were broader, his hands stronger, and his face carried the sun's marks. But inside, he still felt like the same young cowboy who had once tried to comfort a crying child. He had no idea that the girl was growing into a woman who still remembered him. Some nights, he wondered what happened to her tribe, where they traveled, and whether she ever thought about the ranch again. He wondered if she had grown into someone with her own family, friends, and dreams. Sometimes, when he looked at the old guest room, he found himself thinking about the little girl sleeping in that same bed. He tried to remind himself that she would never come back. Still, he felt an unusual sense of anticipation whenever he heard a horse approaching from far away. He always told himself he was being foolish. One autumn morning, as he sipped his coffee on the porch, he looked across the land and felt the wind shift. Something in the air made him think of the past. He didn't know it yet, but the young woman he once rescued was preparing her journey toward him. Aina began her trip early in the morning. The sun wasn't bright yet, and the world was quiet except for her horse's footsteps. She carried a small satchel, extra water, and a blanket. Around her wrist was the same leather bracelet worn. Slightly faded, but strong. She touched it gently before starting her ride. Her journey took several days. She crossed open plains, passed by streams, and traveled through small canyons. She camped at night, looking at the stars and wondering if the cowboy ever thought of her. Each day brought her closer to the life she remembered only as a child. She wasn't nervous, but she was deeply curious. Would he remember her? Would he recognize the bracelet? Would he be surprised? Mark spent those same days fixing fences, hauling hay, and continuing his routines. He had no idea that someone from his past was riding steadily toward his ranch. He moved through each day unaware that a promise he once made lightly was returning to him, carried by the determination of a girl who had never forgotten him. As the final day of her journey approached, Aina felt both excitement and calm. She had prepared her heart for any outcome. She was ready if he didn't remember her, ready if he had changed, and ready even if he didn't want to speak. She wasn't looking for possession or guarantees. She was looking for truth. She wanted to see whether the warmth she remembered was real, or just a distant memory shaped by time. Mark, unaware of what was about to happen, was repairing the western fence that same morning. He paused for a moment, wiping sweat from his forehead, and looked out across the open land. The wind carried the scent of dust and sun-warmed grass. There was no sign of anything unusual. No storm, no visitor, no sound of riders. But by the next evening, everything in his life would change. Someone from his past was getting closer with every mile. Someone who still carried his old leather bracelet. Someone whose childhood tears he had comforted with a promise he never expected to keep. And while Mark believed life had settled into a predictable routine, destiny was already riding across the plains toward him, quiet, determined, and carrying a memory that refused to fade. Mark was working near the western fence when he first noticed a shape far out on the horizon. At first he thought it was only a wild horse moving across the plains, but after a few seconds, he realized it was a rider alone, steady, moving directly toward his ranch. He wiped the dust from his eyes and watched carefully. He didn't recognize the horse. He didn't recognize the style of riding either. But something about the rider's posture seemed familiar in a strange, distant way. He waited, trying to decide whether he should ride out to greet the stranger or continue watching from where he stood. His instincts made him cautious, but not fearful. Lone riders on this land could be travelers, messengers, or even people looking for help. As the rider drew closer, Mark saw that it was a woman. A strong, confident figure, sitting tall in the saddle. Her hair flowed behind her like a dark ribbon, and she handled the horse with quiet skill. Suddenly, Mark's breath caught in his chest. Around her wrist, he spotted something small, brown, and familiar, a leather bracelet. His bracelet. It hit him all at once. The Apache girl. The storm. The promise. The shy little smile. The way she held the bracelet with both hands, as if it were treasure. He didn't even realize he had stepped away from the fence until he felt the grass brushing against his boots. He stood still, unable to look away as the horse approached slowly, carefully, almost respectfully, as if the rider didn't want to startle him. When she reached the open yard in front of the ranch house, she pulled the reins gently and stopped. Dust floated around the horse's hooves. The sunlight framed her like a warm outline, making her presence even more striking. She climbed down from the horse with calm, graceful movement. Mark felt like time had paused. She walked a few steps toward him, studying his face with quiet, earnest eyes. There was no fear in her expression, only patience and a softness he couldn't explain. She lifted her wrist, showing him the bracelet clearly. He didn't move. For a long moment, he just stared at it, as if the years between now and that childhood day suddenly collapsed into a single second. The bracelet was worn now, the leather darkened by sunlight and time. But it was the same one he made with his own hands. The woman spoke finally, her voice steady but warm. "Do you remember this?" Her English was gentle, careful, but far better than before. Mark swallowed. His voice caught somewhere between memory and disbelief. "Yes, I remember. On Homan." She nodded slowly, as if she already knew he would say that. She took one more step toward him, close enough for him to see the familiar shine in her eyes. The same shine she had as a frightened child, hiding behind a log. You grew up," Mark said quietly, feeling foolish the moment the words left his mouth. She had become a striking young woman, tall and confident, with the calm presence of someone who understood herself deeply. But seeing her standing there, wearing something he made years ago, left him overwhelmed. She smiled softly, not mocking him, only acknowledging the truth. "Many years have passed." She paused, looking around the ranch, then back at him. "I said I would return." Mark felt a strange pull inside his chest. He remembered the moment he said those comforting words to her, the promise he made just so she wouldn't cry. He hadn't meant it literally. But she had. "I came," she continued, "because you gave me home when I had none. You saved me from fear when I was small. You said I could return when I grew. So, I am here." The simplicity of her words struck him more deeply than he expected. He invited her inside, feeling his hands shake slightly, though he tried to hide it. She walked beside him in silence, taking in every detail of the ranch, the barn, the porch, the land stretching behind the house. When they entered the living room, she paused near the fireplace, looking at the very place where she had once warmed her hands as a child. Her expression softened even more. "You remember this room?" he asked quietly. "I remember everything," she answered. Mark didn't know what to say. For years, he believed she had forgotten him. But she hadn't. In fact, she had held onto the memory so strongly that she returned across miles just to see him again. He offered her water, and she accepted it. She sat at the small wooden table, her posture elegant, yet relaxed. They were silent for a moment, both unsure where to begin. Finally, she spoke again. "You said something before my uncle took me home." She touched her wrist again, gently. "You said you would marry me when I grew up." Mark's heart skipped. He remembered the moment clearly, but hearing it from her lips felt surreal. He rubbed the back of his neck, suddenly nervous. I said that only to comfort you. You were crying. I didn't want you to be afraid." She nodded slowly, understanding perfectly. "I know. You were kind." But then, her voice shifted, turning quieter, more honest. "But I did not forget your words. Not because of the promise alone, but because those words gave me strength. I was a small girl, frightened, unsure. You gave me hope." Mark didn't expect such sincerity. He looked at her with new respect. She wasn't here asking for anything out of ownership or obligation. She wasn't demanding he fulfill a promise. She had come for clarity, for truth. "You traveled a long way, just to find me?" he asked softly. She lifted her chin slightly. "Yes. I needed to know if your heart remembers me the way I remember you." Her words struck him deeply. Mark felt his chest tighten with emotion he hadn't expected. She wasn't the frightened child he once protected. She was a grown, strong woman, with purpose in her voice. A woman who had crossed countless miles to look into his eyes and search for the truth. They walked around the ranch together later that day. She asked about the horses, about the land, about his work. Sometimes she fell silent, watching him with thoughtful eyes, as if comparing the man in front of her to the memory she carried. Mark found himself glancing at her too, at how her hair moved in the breeze, how gracefully she walked, how calm her expression stayed even in unfamiliar surroundings. He realized something important. She didn't come because she expected marriage. She came because she valued the connection they once shared. She came because she believed the kindness he gave her had meaning. As they returned from the barn, she stopped suddenly and turned to him. The sunset lit her face with warm colors. She spoke slowly, choosing her words carefully. "I am not a child now. I did not come to force your promise. I only came to see if your heart is open. If not, I will return home with peace." Mark felt something shift inside him. Her honesty touched him in a way he hadn't expected. He saw in her eyes the same gentle courage she had as a little girl, but now it was stronger, shaped by years and experience. "I do remember you," he said quietly. She waited, listening with full attention. "You were only a child," he continued, "but you stayed in my memory. I never expected you would return. Yet, here I am," she said softly. They stood in silence for a long moment. The wind brushed past them gently. The world felt still, as if waiting for them to speak again. Mark finally exhaled. "Stay for a while. You came a long way. We have much to talk about." Aina smiled, a real, warm smile that reminded him of the little girl she once was, but now filled with maturity. "I would like that," she replied. That evening, they sat on the porch under the soft glow of the setting sun. They talked about her tribe, her growth, her skills, her travels. She spoke of how she carried the bracelet during every important moment of her life. She asked him about his ranch, his struggles, and his years of loneliness. The conversation flowed naturally, like two old souls reconnecting. Mark felt something stirring in him that he hadn't felt in years: hope. Not the sharp, uncertain hope of youth, but a steady, warm hope that comes from seeing something real standing in front of you. She had come for truth. She had come for him. And though she didn't ask directly, he understood what she wanted to know. Whether he was someone she could build a life with. By the time the stars filled the sky, Mark realized something he never expected. His heart wasn't confused or hesitant. It was awakening. And Aina, sitting beside him with the bracelet shining softly in the moonlight, waited quietly, giving him all the time he needed to understand what her return truly meant. The morning after their long conversation, Mark woke earlier than usual. The sky was still pale, touched with the first hints of sunrise. He stepped outside and took a deep breath of cool air, trying to clear his thoughts. But, no matter how hard he tried, one thought kept returning. Aina was here. She had come back after so many years, carrying not just a bracelet but a piece of his past he didn't realize he had been missing. Mark walked toward the barn, expecting to begin his chores alone as he did every morning. But when he stepped around the corner, he stopped in surprise. Aina was already awake. She was brushing one of the horses gently, humming a soft tune under her breath. She looked peaceful, like she belonged in this quiet place without forcing anything. He watched for a moment without speaking. The way she moved was calm and confident. She didn't rush. She didn't show discomfort. She had adapted to his ranch life so naturally that it surprised him. When she noticed him standing there, she gave him a gentle smile that warmed his chest. "You wake early," she said softly. He chuckled. "You beat me to it." "I wanted to help," she replied. "This land, it feels like a place where hands should not be idle." Mark nodded slowly. She understood the ranch without needing instructions. That simple harmony made him feel something he hadn't felt in years. A sense of partnership, quiet and steady. They worked together through the morning. She fed the chickens while he checked the water troughs. She helped him push a stubborn calf back toward its mother. She watched him repair a broken fence post, then surprised him by picking up the hammer and helping without being asked. Mark wasn't used to working beside someone. He wasn't used to hearing another person's footsteps next to his. But with her, everything felt natural. The silence between them was not uncomfortable. It was calm, easy, almost grounding. As they walked back toward the house for breakfast, she asked him about the land he owned, how he managed it alone, and whether he ever thought of expanding. He talked about droughts, storms, long nights, and the way loneliness sometimes crept in like a shadow he couldn't chase away. She listened carefully, without interrupting, showing him through her quiet attention that his life mattered to her. Every hour he spent with her made something inside him shift. He realized she wasn't just the little girl he once rescued. She had become a woman with strength, wisdom, and a heart full of patience. She had come not to claim a promise, but to see if there was a place for her beside him. After breakfast, they sat outside on the porch. The sky was bright blue now, and a warm breeze carried the scent of dry grass. Aina rested her hands on her knees, watching the landscape with thoughtful eyes. "You have lived alone for a long time," she said quietly. "Yes," he admitted. "Do you like it this way?" Mark thought for a moment. "I used to believe it was enough. Now, I'm not sure." She turned her head slightly, looking at him with the same calm expression she always had. "Sometimes we think we need nothing more than our own strength. But even strong people need someone to stand with them." He nodded slowly, feeling her words settle deep in his mind. Later in the afternoon, they walked to the far side of the ranch. She asked him about small things, why he planted certain trees, why he built a fence in that direction, why he kept an extra saddle, even though he had only one horse. Mark found himself talking more than usual, because she listened as though every detail mattered. She didn't judge him. She didn't question his choices. She simply wanted to understand him. As the sun began to set, she stopped near a wooden gate and leaned against it. Her expression turned serious, but soft. "Mark," she said, "you remember the promise you made, but I want you to listen carefully now." Mark felt his heart beat faster. "I did not come to force anything," she continued. "If your heart does not wish for me, I will return home and be at peace. I will not be angry. I will not be hurt. Sometimes, kindness comes for a moment, and is meant only for that time." She touched the bracelet again, her fingers brushing it gently. "But sometimes," she said in a quiet voice, "that moment grows into something we cannot forget." Mark stared at her. Her honesty touched him more than he could express. She lifted her eyes to meet his. "I came because I needed to know if that moment meant something to you too." Mark exhaled slowly. The answer had been growing inside him since the moment she arrived. At first he tried to ignore it, confused by the sudden return of a childhood memory, but the more time he spent with her, the clearer it became. He stepped closer, his voice steady but soft. She watched him, waiting. "When you rode in yesterday," he said, "I felt like something was waking up inside me. Something I didn't know I'd been waiting for." Aina's expression softened, and she took a small breath as if relieved. "You are not the little girl I once rescued," he continued. "You're a strong woman, full of courage, and you traveled all the way here just to see if my heart still remembered. That means more to me than I can explain." She took one step toward him now, standing only a few feet away. The wind gently lifted a strand of her hair, and the sky behind her glowed orange with the setting sun. "What do you wish now?" she asked quietly. Mark looked at her with a steady heart. "I wish for you to stay. Not because of a promise made long ago. Not because you came here expecting something, but because my heart wants you here." Aina's eyes softened, shining with quiet emotion. He continued, "If you still want what you came for, then yes, I will marry you. But this time, it won't be a promise made to stop a child from crying. It will be a promise made between two people who understand each other." Her breath trembled slightly, but her smile was steady. "I want to stay," she said, "and I want a life with you." The decision felt natural, like something that had been waiting for years to happen. They did not need long speeches or dramatic words. The connection between them spoke louder than anything they could ever say. They planned a small ceremony. No large crowds, no complicated rituals, just the people who mattered. Word spread slowly, traveling from ranch to ranch, then through the Apache camp where her family lived. Her uncle came, proud and content. Some elders came too, respectful of her choice. The ceremony took place under a large cottonwood tree near the ranch. The air was warm, and the leaves whispered softly above their heads. Mark wore his cleanest shirt, and Aina wore a traditional dress woven by her own hands. It was simple, beautiful, carrying her culture with quiet pride. When she walked toward him, the bracelet caught the sunlight. He had given that little bracelet to a frightened child, never imagining she would carry it all the way into her future. They exchanged simple words, promises that came from their hearts rather than tradition or force. Mark promised to protect her, respect her, and walk beside her. Aina promised to support him, stand with him, and bring peace to his lonely days. Their hands joined gently, naturally, as if they fit together all along. After the ceremony, they shared a quiet meal with everyone. Laughter filled the air. Her uncle teased Mark kindly, and Mark laughed in a way he hadn't in years. For the first time in a long time, the ranch felt alive, not just a place of work, but a home. That night, when the guests left and the sky turned dark, Mark and Aina stood together on the porch. The stars were bright above them. She leaned her head slightly toward him, and he rested his hand over hers. "This place feels different now," she whispered. Mark nodded. "Because it's no longer just my home. It is ours now," she said softly. He turned to her and smiled. "Yes, ours." And in that moment, surrounded by open land and quiet night, Mark understood something he had never realized before. Sometimes, the smallest act of kindness creates a path that the heart never forgets. A storm, a frightened child, a simple promise. All had led to this moment, shaping a future neither of them could have imagined. Aina had returned not because of a childhood promise, but because destiny had woven their lives together long before they understood it. And now, standing side by side, they were finally ready to walk the rest of the path together.